I've never thought about talking until today about how to create your own residency, which I have done many times simply because finding a paid residency I have found is they're extremely competitive, which is not to dissuade anyone. I think applying to residencies is a really good practice. It's a good way to refine your vision and get really clear on what you are attracted to, what you're not attracted to, who you would like to work with, what atmosphere you would like to work in. And it's exciting. It's an exciting kind of almost academic project and process because you have to bring your work together. And then once you do that, you also will have pieces of work that you can use later. You'll have an artist statement ready to go, and you'll have an impetus for writing a good artist statement. You'll have pictures that you of your work that you will have taken the time to do. So preparing a residency application basically just creates the container for you to curate materials that you will use in many other spheres if you are a creative outputter in any way, shape, or form. I think the word might be artist, but that word is fraught, so figured I'd offer an alternative. But anyway, a new friend of mine asked me today when I told her that I am soon to undertake a self-organized residency to Mexico. I am going to leave a little bit more than a month from now, and I have rented a gorgeous house outside of the city of Guanajuato. Hopefully, I'm saying that right, in Mexico. My Spanish is middling to pathetic. Well, it's not that bad. I don't have a lot of practice with Spanish, and this is definitely a largely Spanish only speaking town. So I have done this a number of times at this point in my life. I have had the impulse to travel abroad. I have perpetually been, have not had a lot of extra cash and money to work with. I have perpetually been unable to find someone who's willing to accompany me for the entire duration, and oftentimes I end up going alone and having to fund this situation for myself. So I guess I'll give a little bit on that, a little more on that now. There's been a lot of trial and error for me. I took my first long trip to Europe when I was 22, and I went alone, and I went with very little money. I had wanted to study dance at the time, and I am not the most practical person in the world in terms of logistics. So there were many, many mistakes that I made that I can digress into at a later date. Many of them were difficult at the time, and now I look back and I realize they were good lessons and I learned a lot. So I will try to offer in this video or upcoming videos little notes that may help you avoid the more painful circumstances that I found myself in, because I don't tend to be the most practical person. And I launched myself into foreign countries, often where they did not speak English and I did not speak the language. Places in Eastern Europe. I was in Morocco. I was in Portugal, but I was with people that spoke English at that time. So I guess what I'm telling you right in this moment is language is definitely a barrier or a gateway. And when I first traveled, I'm digressing a little bit, but when I first traveled, I did not fully acknowledge, I was very young, and I did not fully acknowledge that going to a country where you do not speak the native language that most people speak is actually very difficult. I'm not saying don't do it. but I'm saying be prepared for the deep difficulties of not knowing the language of the country you're in. We do have better technology now. I did not have a cell phone the first couple times that I traveled, so there are things like translators and whatnot that can be very helpful. But in order to stay on task somewhat, because I'm a rambler, I'm going to kind of hit some main points that I think are really important in considering creating your own artist residency. And then, as I said, I will probably, because I can't help it, digress in this video and in other videos about my own personal anecdotal experiences. So let's see. So the first thing would be, where are you drawn to? And for me, I have always had a deep fantasy and desire to explore cultures that are foreign to my own. For me, what that has meant is I was largely drawn to European cultures. I have not as yet traveled to places like Asia. I was in Morocco for a short period of time, and I have traveled a bit in Latin America. For some of you, traveling to another town in your state may be the perfect thing. And I am not going to belittle. Changing your environment is a very profound way to shift your reality, your perception, your habits. So you might be living, as I am right now, if you can hear it, on the side of a highway, and you may have just enough resources to go for a week to a cabin in the woods an hour away. There is so much potential for profundity in that, and for deep work, and for deeply catalyzing your work, that it cannot be spoken. It's a very personal thing. So you have to assess your materials and your abilities, your financial liabilities, liability is not the right word, your financial resources, what you have available to you, and what you're comfortable with. And I always, when I was younger, I definitely jumped way into the deep end because I did not have a good sense of what I can handle and what was going to overwhelm me. Now, this is part of the magic of being young, is you fling yourself off cliffs, and you have not yet done that, so you're less cautious and you just do it. As you get older and you have amassed a long history of somewhat painful or difficult experiences, you can tend to become more narrow and take less risks because you're trying to avoid that discomfort. So there is a balance between taking a risk, and for me, any kind of travel, actually, I notice, brings up in me certain neurosis and fear. When I'm going to my partner's house for the weekend, I'll start, packing a whole slew of completely needless things. I'll try to pack my whole painting studio. I'll pack 3 books when I probably won't even read a paragraph out of one of them. That I have come to recognize as my anxiety response to my world is shifting. So you have to just learn to observe yourself and learn where your edge is, how far you can challenge that edge, and how far is too far, meaning how far causes you then to recoil and put up lots of protective boundaries and be afraid next time. Maybe you pushed just a little too far and it caused you to close in. I think that edge you constantly need to exercise and experiment with. Otherwise, you get old and stiff and crusty. So it's not easy work. This is part of working on yourself. So part of this is analyzing what you need physically, how much money realistically, what you can deal with realistically in terms of comfort. When I took my first journey out of the country, I stayed in very inexpensive youth hostels. Now, I I knew then, and I was not acknowledging, and I certainly know now, that staying in a group youth hostel with many loud, drunk youth for me was extremely stressful and frustrating and was not conducive to me doing any good work at all. So, do you need a private place, a private room, a private house? Do you do well down a country lane where you do not see other human beings, or are you going to be scared and feel isolated? If you are going to feel scared and potentially isolated in a cabin in the woods, maybe you can still do it, but do you have some way to get into town and to make contact with people? Maybe if you have your own space, living in the middle of a big city is perfect. It also obviously depends on your practice. For me, I work in mixed media when I'm working in two-dimensional art media. And I've worked with wax, which, if you know encaustic, that's a whole setup. Cold wax requires less of a setup. I often work with many different kinds of materials. So when I go to Mexico next month, I'm really scaling it down. I'm taking a limited palette, which is something that I'm always trying to do and I'm always failing to do because I have all my paints laid out. I'm taking a couple of colors, I'm taking some charcoal, I'm taking some small portable canvases, and I'm going to find pieces of wood in the country in Mexico and paint on that. I'm not a hugely prolific painter, so 2.5 months of supplies does not mean a huge overbearing amount of material that I have to bring with me. And of course, then we can get into details, which I won't get into now, but how are you going to bring the material with you? Are there limits on the airplanes? We're in the middle of COVID-19 right now, so I'm just assuming that I'll be able to get on the airplane with my mask on and everything will be fine. So we'll see about that. I think it'll be fine. But there's just different necessities that you have to allow for. So I think I've kind of covered giving you an overview there of understanding what it is your needs and your boundaries are, your requirements. How are you going to take care of yourself when you go on residency, and how long is realistically financially doable and also will serve your practice. I recently encountered a parameter that I quite like. It may be obviously far too extensive for some people. Admittedly, when I've done these residencies in the past, I prefer to get to know a place, so that requires longer periods of time. And I have traditionally basically packed up my entire ship, closed up the place where I've lived. I'm a renter, so I basically tell my landlady that I'm moving out, and I never return to that particular home again. I'm I'm a person of extremes. I am learning to temper them as I get older, and this time I have just made the decision that I'm going to move out of this wonderful place that I've been in. But it's time for me to expand. I have at this moment a very supportive partner who has agreed to help me find a place when I come back, and I do have a place to land. I have a place where I can stay in the meantime while I find a new place when I come back. And I feel very ready to improve my situation. Said highway is getting on my nerves. I moved into this place as a transitional environment, and I have been here longer than I expected. So what I'm saying to you is I am going to burn that bridge. And so for longer residencies, if you don't have a lot of financial resources like me, burning that bridge has been essential to be able to pay rent in a new place and not pay rent in two places. If you can pay rent in two places, by all means. So that being said, the parameter I was going to share with you is 3 months. And the 3-month residency is beautiful in my mind because you have a month to arrive at the place, get oriented, settle, explore, make connections, etc., land in your practice. In the second month, you get to really dig into the groove. I try not to plan at this point my projects too far in advance because there are so many unknowns. We have the Virgin Mary back here. I am very interested in getting to know the Virgin Mary more deeply, and I am going to Mexico, and in particular a Catholic city where the Virgin Mary is venerated. And so I do have it in my mind that that's an exploration that I'm going to do when I'm doing this residency. But there's a lot of unknown factors, so you want to leave it open. So the second month is where you can really get into that groove because you've gotten a feel for the place and maybe your practice takes an entirely different direction. I'm not married to one single medium, hence I call myself at times an interdisciplinary artist. In academic circles, people know what that means. I still don't really know what it means, but in a general sense, it means I'm not married to medium. It's more what medium suits my message. I am going to see what arises for me. I may spend more time writing. I'm planning on spending a lot of time writing. The third month allows you, and I feel like this is a very important component that it has taken me a while to learn, but it's the fruition, and you want to allow enough time for your work to come to fruition, and also find some way, if you haven't found that way already in your residency, to contribute to the community that you're in, to share your work with the people who live in the town that you've been a guest in, or the environment, the spirits, the animals, whatever realm that you are most drawn to and called to. Be of service. You're going to, especially if you're going to another country, be humble and be of service, and give them a good sense of you're a representative of wherever you're coming from. So think of it as being a good guest. And as a good guest, I've always appreciated the tradition of bringing an offering, even if it's when I was on the Lakota reservation, I was told, nobody had a lot of money, and I was told, bring a carton of eggs. Just bring something to offer your hosts. And at the time I was paranoid. I had no belongings. I had very little money. And I was like, what can I bring? And they said, bring a carton of eggs. That will be well received. And it really does go a long way. So third part of your residency, even if it's not 3 months, even if it's 3 weeks, even if it's 3 days, this can be a structure. Offer something and take the time to bring your residency to a close with gratitude for whatever you've been through. I have been through some very gnarly, mostly self-directed ones, residencies that were difficult for me, where shadow material came up hardcore, and I was just not in my best by any stretch of the imagination. So just give thanks, let go of whatever that was that came up, that you're still alive, hopefully, and maybe you've survived Giardia or whatever you've been doled out, but conclude your residency, allow time for that. What else? So for now, those 3 or 4, however many, let's see. So where are you drawn to? What area? How far away is it? Do you have a sense of being drawn to an area to do a particular project? Where do you want to go? What environment will support you? Maybe you're looking to move there, even you're just doing a scouting trip. How long? How long is sustainable for you? How long will allow you to get your project done? How long before your partner decides to separate from you because you've been there for too long? Questions like that. Resources. How are you going to obtain the resources you need? And how are you going to sustain yourself while you're there, and sustain your practice while you're there? And I do want to note that there are a lot of things that are just outliers that you can't see. For example, when I was looking at places in Mexico, there were read up, do the research. There were a lot of reviews for the places that I looked at that in the first town I was looking at, they had a lot of American tourists, and one issue was barking dogs. There were a lot of barking dogs in that particular city, and a lot of people from the US are used to a certain level of quietude. And if you're going into a different culture in particular, educate yourself, because there might be different ideas of what a boundary is, what a decent living, how your neighbors expect to interact with you. Educate yourself, because some of these people on the reviews for their places on Airbnb said there are a lot of barking dogs around here. So if that's going to drive you mad, which I live next to barking dogs right now, so I'm maintaining semi-sanity. It annoys me, but I like my neighbors, so it's okay. But normally I would be a little wary about that. It would annoy me. So things like that. And then, very important, especially if you're going alone, but even if you're not, if you have plans to actually make this a residency for your art practice, that means you need to have some sort of structure in place. I am a person that needs a lot of structure. That structure alleviates my anxiety. I have learned this, and I've learned what works for me over a long period of time, and I'm still working it out. I've basically gone from having no structure to having far too much structure, and it's a pendulum. Maybe it's a pendulum for your entire life. I don't know. I'm getting better at it. But if you're going somewhere and you're going to be alone and you have never been in that kind of a situation where you're not working your day job, or you have not had that much open time before, or you are usually have friends or whoever in your life to distract you and break up the day, or you have a boss that tells you what to do for half of your week, this is not to be underestimated. Figure out a rhythm that works for you in advance. And this is not to say to be overly tight about it, but for example, my structure right now, as I'm living in my life, working very part-time at a part-time job, is that I wake up in the morning, I do my spiritual practice that involves some movement and some sitting meditation, some type of meditation. Then I immediately sit down and I do a writing practice for 45 minutes to an hour. And then I enter into what I call studio lab. And I generally break things up into hour-and-a-half chunks, where after about 90 minutes, it happens naturally. I don't set a bell or anything, but after an hour and a half, I have to pee, or I want a snack, or I want to get a coffee. And I generally work for about 3 hours, and then I take another break or a larger break. And then in the afternoons, or later on in the day, I usually attend to something like admin, making a video, editing my writing, logistical stuff, and then I leave the evening open. So that provides me enough of a sense of discipline and what I'm going to do for the day. And that has to do also with my energy rhythm. So I tend to be not ready to engage the world in the morning, but definitely awake and in a creative state of mind and receptive coming out of the dreams. So that's when, and art and creative process is my priority. So I have found that doing that first thing in the morning, unless I have an extremely pressing admin thing, is the way to go. I do the art and creative practice first, and then the admin follows. At some points, I have to put the admin first just because it doesn't get done otherwise, but I've gotten pretty good. So I think you see my gist. And then in the afternoon, I tend to take a siesta, which means a break or a walk or a nap. A lot of times I find that's really helpful. And then in the afternoon, evening, later after the siesta, I have another period of a few hours, 3 hours or something, to put in, as I said, more logistical, more admin type work. I leave flexibility around this. And obviously, if you're in a new culture and a new environment, if somebody invites you out, you let go of your structure. But having something to lean into, so you're not just kind of always wandering around aimlessly and you have a sense of what your goals are, what your vision is, even though that can adjust, is important. And I consider that to be a really good way of keeping anxiety at bay and at least moving towards moving into your vision, your ever shifting vision, the ever shifting vision that you and the world meeting makes. Okay, so that's what I have to say about creating your own residency for right now. If you have any questions for me, put them in the comments. Hope that was helpful.